Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm used to having morning meetings. My name is Barbara Friedman. I'm the president of the Orient Association. And we have Ellen Zimmerman here, the president of the East Marion Association. And our presenter today is Margaret Steinbugler, who is the vice president of the Southold Peconic Civic Association. And Margaret is going to talk to us today about code compliance and enforcement. I want to preface it by saying that all of the hamlets, except for Greenport West, have been meeting regularly as a group, informally calling ourselves the North Fork Civics of Southold. And we formed some subcommittees. One of the subcommittees was on code enforcement, because a lot of the residents, a lot of the association leaders felt that it was an important topic to look into. So they did extensive research on code complaints and what happens when a complaint is made and what the outcome was. And we realized that one of the problems is that a lot of citizens don't know the code. So we thought, well, for one, we want to let people know how to make complaints, but we also want to educate or help the town educate the citizens about code, especially new people who come to Southold and don't know the basics about trash and water and septic systems and the like. So the thinking on this code enforcement committee and how we're presenting it to the public has kind of shifted a little bit, and so we're going to also talk about the code and things you might not know about the town code. So here's Margaret. Oh, I'm supposed to introduce her as a retired engineer, manager, and data geek.
Thanks, Barbara, and thanks everybody for coming. I do see some folks in the audience who've heard this pitch before, so thank you for returning for more punishment. I'm going to start off with why should we care about code enforcement? I'll run through some data that resulted from a request to the town to supply us with complaints that were submitted to the town attorney's office. And I'll run through some highlights of the code as it relates to some of the most frequent complaints. So why should we care about code enforcement? Well, there are kind of three big elements. The text box you'll see on the right is an excerpt from the town's comprehensive plan. And it noted that in the public meetings that were held in concert with developing that plan, code enforcement came up in every meeting. And some of the quotes from those meetings were things the public said. New homeowners should get some handouts to understand the main town code issues. Litter law needs to be stronger and enforced. More enforcement is needed for water quality and activities. Are new regulations really enforceable? So it's a hot topic. It comes up a lot. A second reason to care about code enforcement relates to a survey that the North Fork Civics did last year in the summer of 2022. We asked a number of questions. One was to the respondents, what are the top 3 issues you think the town should work on in the next couple of years? And code enforcement, or issues related to code enforcement, kind of hit the middle of the pack, but 13% of the respondents said, I think the town should work on enforcing the town codes as one of their top 3 picks. And 8% said, I think the town should work on enforcing short-term rental regulations. So there is interest in having the codes enforced. In that survey, we allowed respondents to give some free-form comments, and there were a lot of comments about code enforcement. These are a few. This is a sampling. But codes and rules are unimportant unless we're willing to enforce them. We should enforce the code. We should enforce the lighting code. We should have extra code enforcement people. We're weak on code enforcement and we're vague in codes. We should raise fines on violations and have an army of code enforcers. We should protect rural character, including strong codes for outdoor lighting and protecting the night sky. And there was some talk about these are one-off exceptions. It degrades the environment and our neighborhoods, and it sends the message that the town isn't serious about code enforcement. This is what respondents to the survey said. This wasn't me or Barbara or Ellen. These are people that took the survey. If we look at what the community values and how it relates to the enforcement of town codes, we get a chart like this. The left-hand side lists the top 3 characteristics of these communities in Southold Town that people said they valued most. We said, what do you value most about your community? And the top 3 were natural beauty, rural character, and quality of life. Then if we look at the top 8 code complaints, those are listed across the top. Illegal rental, illegal construction, lawn and yard issues, and so on. And I took a somewhat subjective stab at saying, how do those complaints impact what we value most about the community? And if there seemed to be a very direct impact, I colored that green. And if there was perhaps a more indirect impact, I colored that yellow. But you see from the green that there seems to be a high degree of correlation between frequent complaints and erosion of what we value about the community. Now I'm going to dive into data, since I'm a data geek. We, as a group, our team, submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the town for information on complaints submitted to the code enforcement branch of the town attorney's office. It covered the time period from January 2019 through August of 2021. And it took us like a year to analyze all that data. There were 1,259 complaints. I know this because I looked at every one. And they were roughly, I'm going to say 430 to 530 per year. Is that a lot or a little? Well, it's about 2 complaints per year per 100 residents. I want to emphasize these are just the complaints that went to the town attorney's office. That does not count complaints made to the police, the building department, the bay constables, or other entities within the town government. This is just the code enforcement set. So what are all these complaints about? This is a chart showing most to least frequent with some color coding to tell you what year it was. The top 3 categories, illegal rental, illegal construction, and lawn and yard complaints. After that, we have the unregistered vehicle, fence issues, and noise issues. Those top 6 complaints account for 58, nearly 60% of all the complaints. So this is what your neighbors are concerned about and raising a flag about. Well, what happens when someone makes a complaint? The code enforcement officer generally will try to get on it pretty promptly. And they will visit the address, they will visit the property, and try to make a determination if the complaint is valid or not. In about 35% of the cases, so this bar on the far left, the code enforcement officer finds the complaint is unfounded. You know, it's not a violation of the code. Interesting. That's a lot of time spent by somebody who's a busy guy only to find out the complaint was unfounded. Second most common disposition, 26%, is voluntary compliance. What that usually means is the code enforcement officer speaks to the property owner, and the property owner says, gee, I didn't know I needed a fence here, I couldn't have a fence there, or that I need to mow my lawn, or and so on. Didn't know I needed a building permit. And they say, I will take care of it. And that's good. At the time we grabbed the data, there were still a number of, at any given time, you'd expect that not all the issues or complaints can be dispositioned. There's always going to be some floating pending completion. So that was about 16%. And then all the other small bars are other outcomes. But what they amount to is that of all the complaints submitted, about 9 or 10% result in some kind of discipline sort of thing, some kind of impact to the homeowner. It might be a ticket, it might be a fine, it might be a stop work order, but that's only about 1 out of 10 complaints. And then there are a number that get referred. There's a small bar in the middle that says referred. It means the code enforcement officer investigated and said, there might be something here, but it's really for the building department to address, or it's really for the police to address, or it's really for the trustees to address. So those are referrals. So I'll just wrap up a picture of where we are with code enforcement from a high level, and then I'm going to delve into some of the specifics of some of those top most frequent complaints. So based on the analysis of data, we have 430 to 530 complaints a year. Top categories, illegal rental and illegal construction. Over a third of the cases are determined to be unfounded, and maybe 1 in 10 results in some kind of ramification for the homeowner. In the course of doing this project, we also interviewed people, we talked among ourselves, we talked about this in our civic association meetings, and we had some anecdotal input. 2 code enforcement officers that came from talking to the prior town attorney, mainly weekday coverage and mainly reactive to complaints. The former town attorney also confirmed. There's little visibility of this kind of data to the town board. The village of Greenport has, I think, a monthly report from their building department code enforcement folks to the town board, to their board on how many complaints and the nature of complaints. I don't think the town of Southold has that. And what we really heard a lot from the people we spoke to in our civic association meetings and other venues is people do not want to have to complain about their neighbors. People do not want to be having to complain to get enforcement. So what I hear is they want proactive enforcement. People are very uncomfortable reporting their neighbors. So now I'm going to go into some of the high level, what the code says about those most frequent complaints and what some examples are of violations. So the most frequent complaint was illegal rental. The main elements of the code when it comes to illegal rentals are you need to have a rental permit. There's a 2-week minimum rental period, unless you're a B&B, a hotel, or a motel, and you're supposed to collect a Suffolk County tax of 5.5%. Well, what's wrong with a short-term rental? What's wrong with letting out your house or an apartment or something on a short-term rental site? It undermines community character and safety. It may consume housing that could otherwise be affordable by taking year-round rentals off the market. If you don't have a rental permit, it means your rental is probably not getting inspected, and that could result in some pretty serious safety concerns. It can generate noise, parking issues, and there's the potential for short-term rentals to be party houses, and they're often not tax compliant. You may have read in, was it Newsday? Recently that Suffolk County is hiring a service to try to identify the locations of short-term rentals in order to collect that 5.5% rental tax. I will just point out that the Southold Community Housing Plan draft noted that short-term rentals, by taking year-round rentals off the market, are, making year-round rentals that much more difficult for full-time residents to access. Well, how big is the problem? Given the time of year, there's usually somewhere between 770 and 800 short-term rentals being advertised on various short-term rental websites like VRBO and Airbnb. People who work in real estate know that to legally rent a property, you need a rental permit. And so real estate professionals make sure that rental permits are secured. The red bars in this chart indicate legal rentals represented through the multiple listing service. The blue bars by Hamlet are the ones that are not covered by an agent, not covered by MLS, potentially, maybe some have a rental permit, but potentially unpermitted. They clearly swamp the legal rentals. We took a look at East Marion as an example because it's a small community, it's compact, and I think people tend to have a good idea of what's going on in their neighborhood. 55, give or take, depending on the time of year perhaps, but there were 55 short-term rentals available in East Marion in February 2023, the opposite of peak summer. There's only about 2.2 square miles in East Marion. That number of rentals is roughly 5% of the homes in East Marion, so that seems pretty high. And people are making a lot of money on this. $580 per night was the average rent. Well, what could we do about this? A possible action would be to get the same help Suffolk County is getting to identify illegal rentals, maybe even piggybacking off their contract, to secure services of software companies that offer to identify the locations and owners of illegal rentals. They use a combination of scraping data from the rental websites combined with artificial intelligence overlaid with human oversight, and they identify who's renting illegally. So in July of 2022, we had some, as the North Fork Civics, we had some conversations with one of these providers. They identified over 800 short-term rentals available in Southold Town. They offer, if you want, and it comes with a cost, but they offer to send letters to the owners. They offer to follow up. They offer to keep track of who's paying and who isn't. We go back to that community housing plan concern that short-term rentals are taking away year-round rentals. If there's 800 short-term rentals out there in the whole town of Southold, do a little thought experiment. What if only 10 or 20% of them were made available to year-round residents? That's 80 to 160. That's a lot. That's a lot. Not insignificant. Second most frequent complaint is illegal construction. Building permits are required for work that has to comply to the Uniform Code and the Energy Code. What does that mean? It's required for changes to structural features, changes to building systems like electrical systems, maybe plumbing, I'm not sure, changes to load-bearing elements of the building. It's not required for sort of interior finish work like painting, tiling, wallpaper. Under 10,000, thank you. So the building department issues about 118 building permits per month, and 19 of them per month are for as-built. That means about 16% of all building permits issued are for people that didn't get the permit before they did the building, usually. And the number of complaints that came into the code enforcement arm, that was only about 6 per month. So if you divide 6 by 19, about a third of the illegal, maybe you can say about a third of the illegal building is surfaced by neighbors complaining, but 2/3 is not. It comes through some other source of information. And we have, through anecdotal information, it seems like building permits are not consistently displayed. Some people might have a permit, they don't post it, neighbor complains, someone has to go investigate, it's kind of time wasted. So there's an opportunity there to maybe be a little more efficient by ensuring permits are displayed. Now I'm going to go to what I call visible, or in one case, audible violations. Violations that could be detected and addressed if we had code enforcement folks looking for violations rather than just waiting for them to come in from neighbor complaints. These are things you can see from the road without even setting foot on the property. But two quotes kind of inspire this section. One is from a sociologist who sort of was the guy who, you might say, is the father or grandfather of broken windows policing. He says, public order is a fragile thing, and if you don't fix the first broken window, soon all the windows will be broken. So if you don't keep up after things, you can expect more of the same. Second, you get what you demand and you encourage what you tolerate. As I go through the next few examples, you see we tolerate a lot. There's a lot of violations out there. We all probably walk by them every day and nothing's being done about it. So number 3 complaint, lawn and yard issues. The town code says water will be adequately drained. You can't have water running off your property to somewhere else. Landscaping needs to be maintained, and garbage needs to be kept inside the building and regularly removed. Well, I scanned through the complaints that from this category. There's lots of garbage and litter in yard complaints, construction debris complaints, furniture on the lawn complaints, overgrown grass complaints. I get that we might want to let the grass grow. It's good for pollinators, but let's let the code reflect that. If we want to let the behavior happen, let's make the code updated to reflect it. Number 4 complaint, unregistered vehicles. This one's pretty self-explanatory, but the code says junked or unregistered vehicles may not be located or stored in open view. And yet it happens so much that it's the number 4 most frequent complaint. 5th most frequent complaint is fences. There are height limits and lower limits in the event that you live on a corner. And there are specific rules about deer fences, that a building permit is required for them, and they are not allowed to be in the front yard unless you have a legitimate agricultural operation. So I scanned through the complaints about fences. Many of them were pools without fences, inadequate or no fence in a construction area, fence falling down, deer fence without permit. Those are some of the fence complaints that came in. Number 6 complaint, noise. This one's kind of tough. You can't see it, but you can hear it. The town code says noise pollution is prohibited, and noise pollution causes harm, or it's noise that disturbs a reasonable person of normal sensibilities. Quantifiably, it means that at the property line, the noise level should be less than 50 dBA at night and less than 65 during the day. Complaints to the code enforcement part of the town attorney's office were 58 during the time period for which we had data, which is about 2 per month. Complaints to the police department, so that was another FOIA request, thanks to Anne. Complaints to the police department for a slightly longer period of time showed us there were 871 complaints. So if we look at that per month, that's about 20 per month. So 10 times as many noise complaints going to the police department as going to code enforcement, probably because much of the noise is happening on weekends and at night when, as of yet, we do not have a code enforcement officer working. Of those 871 complaints, this was a multi-page report. Every row is a police officer saying, I went to this address and this is what I did. So every one of those complaints represents a visit from a police officer. Over that period of time and that many complaints, there was 1 noise ticket issued and 3 parking tickets. So it's a lot of effort. It's a lot of effort to follow up on this stuff, but I'm not sure it's effectively dealing with the problem. The number 7 most frequent complaint, signs. The code talks about no temporary signs, which are kind of these banana or stick in the ground signs. There's all kinds of other requirements for signs, but this one was very easy to find examples of. The photo on the far left was a restaurant. The photo on the far right was a gas station. I'm not sure you can see, but each one has 3 signs in it. The code says you will only have 1 exterior temporary sign at a time. So you probably see this as well, but there's often these kinds of temporary signs out there. If the property is a legitimate ag business, that's an exception. So wineries are an exception. But a gas station having 3, that shouldn't be happening. Number 8 complaint, lighting. Does everybody here know that Southold Town has a dark sky code? Everybody knows. Okay, that's great, because this is your civic members and this is an informed community. I think a lot of people don't know. Generally, the code sets requirements for the lighting fixtures on homes and requires that they be what's called cutoff luminaires. And it requires that non-essential lighting be turned off within a half hour of close of business or when not in use. So the top 2 photos show some uplit landscaping, clearly after dark. Doesn't look essential, probably shouldn't be on. The bottom photo shows a home that was built in 2017 with clearly non-compliant lighting. Very easy to see. Anyone driving around can tell that this is not compliant lighting. You may recall there was a front page article in the Suffolk Times last August where Laura Clary with the North Fork Dark Sky Coalition was saying, I'd really like to see some proactive enforcement of the town lighting code. So we're not the only folks saying we need a little more proactive enforcement. So it's great that folks in this room know there's a lighting code. This is an example of what is permitted and what's not permitted. And maybe the quick and dirty way to think about it is that the light bulb should not extend down below the plane of the light fixture, or it needs to be shielded. Number 12 complaint, trailers and RVs. The town code says if you're going to keep or store a trailer or RV, they can't be occupied, and they're not supposed to be in front yards. They should be in the rear yard. So photo on the left, RV stored in front yard, or side yard, not rear yard. Photo on right, RV smack in front of a home, and you might not be able to tell from the photo, but it's plugged in, so it seems like it might be occupied. Again, something easy to see. Complaint number 13, 13th most frequent, boat storage. If you have a boat, it should only be stored in the rear yard. All of these photos, which I took on a walk around my neighborhood, they are all within 1 mile of my house, and they all are parked in the front or visible from the road. I will say this, folks have made the point that we are a waterfront community and people have boats. Maybe we should allow storage in front yards. I'm okay with that, but make the code clear, allow it in the code. Don't make people violate the code and encourage the sense that the town doesn't care and that the code can be violated with impunity. Dumpsters. I left this one in because some of these examples came from East Marion. It's only the number 18th complaint, so it's not that frequent. However, there seems to be a sense in some quarters that it's becoming more common. Our data only went through August of 2021. We're almost 2 years later now in 2023. If this is happening more frequently, another look at the data might reveal an uptick in dumpsters You're not supposed to have a dumpster in your front yard or side yard unless you have an active building permit. So these are some examples where there are dumpsters and no building permit displayed. So this has been so far a look back. We're looking at data from 2019 to 2021, and we talked about what the community's thoughts are. What could a future vision look like? We think a two-pronged approach would be effective. We should educate the public and enforce the code. So educating the public could be forums like this, where we talk about some of the most common elements of the code that cause complaints, and we should be more rigorous in enforcement. That could include increasing the number of code enforcement officers, expanding coverage to evenings and weekends, all those lighting and noise complaints, proactively addressing violations. They're visible. He won't be the Maytag repairman waiting for the phone calls. He can go out and look for stuff. Levy appropriate fines. And how about a regular report to the town board saying these are the things that are happening and people are complaining about, here's what we're finding, and here's what the outcome was. So good news is, in the last several months, we have gotten a new town attorney, and he seems to be very interested in beefing up code enforcement, including hiring additional code enforcement personnel and considering how we can more effectively enforce the short-term rental code, including hiring additional code enforcement officers. If you read the Suffolk Times, you may recognize this ad from the May 4th edition, advertising for a part-time code enforcement officer to work nights and weekends. That would be great. That would be great. Someone could go around and look at those lighting issues, could respond to noise complaints, and be available when the community needs them for those sorts of violations. Well, we're wrapping up almost. Next steps. What can you or we do? One would be get acquainted with the town code. You can, I'll have a slide in the next slide or two to show you where to find it. File a complaint online with the town on their website. I'll show you how to find that form. Advocate for and support some of these recommendations. Contact code enforcement when you have a complaint. Contact the town attorney. You could, though, talk to your neighbors. Once you get a little educated about the town code, you might want to have a friendly chat. It's very likely that someone violating the code doesn't even know they're violating. So a friendly chat could be helpful. And these are some of the pointers that are courtesy of the Dark Sky Society, but learn about the issue, be informative, stay positive, don't argue, be tactful. You might ask your neighbor to come see the issue from your yard so they see what it is you're concerned about. Where can I find the town code? It's really easy. If you go to the town website and scroll down, there's a big button that says town code. And it is actually very nicely searchable. You can search for lighting, you can search for dumpster, you can search for terms, and it gives you a nice set of responses, nice set of results that you can click on and get well educated. Who enforces the town code? Interestingly, it can vary by the chapter of the code. Most of this data has been about complaints that went to the code enforcement branch of the town attorney's office. A few, I talked about noise, went to the police department. But there's a lot of other branches or parts of the town government that are responsible or have some responsibility for code enforcement. Obviously, code enforcement in the police department, but building inspectors play a big role when it comes to inspecting for safety and building permits. Fire marshals are code enforcement officers. Harbor masters, formerly known as bay constables, also help enforce the code. And there's others. There's some code that says the town attorney or the town engineer can enforce the code. So the good news is you don't have to know who enforces it to make a complaint. This is a screenshot from the town website that shows how to make a complaint. You can make a complaint anonymously. It will, the form will ask for your contact information. You are not required to fill that out. However, if you want someone to get back to you and say what they learned or what was done about your complaint, then you do need to include that information. That's it. I'd be happy to try and answer some questions or actually hear your views and your perspective or your what's good about the town code and good about enforcement and what are some of the problems from your perspective. So, great point. I do want to give the town credit for having noise meters. They do have noise meters. And there are many instances, I read through many, not all, of many of those 871 noise complaints that went to the police. And in many cases, it's kind of what code enforcement calls voluntary compliance. The loud party gets turned down. The one ticket got generated when the violator said, oh yeah, I'll turn down the volume, and they turned it down. And before the police officer got out of earshot, they turned it back up. That was the one ticket. But a lot of those times are the person being complained against says, yes, I will comply. So there's some enforcement. It's just, you know, they are kind of free to violate again, and no one's keeping track of, that I can tell, no one's keeping track of, say, the repeats. Mm-hmm.
I have him on my phone and neighbor continues to, on a regular basis, he, what do you do with that? We're having the friendly conversation.
Yeah.
With the person. Maybe it's better than it used to be. It used to be not even close to that house.
Yeah.
But now if you're close to that house, and I can record it. I can sit.
Right.
I have never made a formal complaint.
So
And the police have come up multiple times.
mm-hmm. I'm not sure what to say, except that there is a new set of folks in the town attorney's office. So the new sheriff in town. So there may be a more energetic enforcement on that front. I know what I would like to see happen. This is my personal opinion, but if there are repeat complaints about the same address, I think that should be tracked. And on the third or fourth or fifth or 10th complaint on the same address, I think there should be some financial repercussions. A ticket. Mhm.
Well, you need-
I don't know.
You said, you've got, I can do it for you. I can find out how many hypothetically.
That's what I would recommend, you know, and in fact, if you give me the address, since I have those 871, I might be able to do a quick search and find out how many complaints have been made across to that. Sir, you were next, I think.
In violation of the code. Ridiculous.
I think they're awfully low.
It's unreasonable. The person who annoys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But has anyone complained about you having a beer on your porch that you know of? Has anyone issued a complaint for that situation? Yeah. Not yet. Yeah. Sir, yes.
I'd like to move on to your building permit issue. I was struck by the number of as-is permits. Is there a sensible additional payment as to bring something into compliance? Should have had a building permit.
I don't think so. Do you know, Barbara? There is? Thank you. For the as-built? Thank you.
But keep in mind that a lot of that.
I understand that, but there's some really where people have skirted the initial.
Yeah. There's quite a lot in the data where if you read the details, it'll say, you know, owner applied for a permit but didn't get it in time. They were just impatient. There's a lot of that. So, ma'am, you have a question? Oh. Interesting. Yeah. I'm unaware of any laws specifically addressing pickleball. There is, of course, noise, and there might be setbacks. I'm not sure if setbacks would apply to something like a pickleball or tennis court. Yes, thank you. Okay.
One other thing I'd like to
Ooh.
with that building based on what you did.
Oh, you had a question?
Yeah, regarding noise and like, what is, doesn't seem possible to mow your lawn. Noise level, there is no power.
Yeah.
Is exception to that.
Yeah, there is an exception.
And then a second question.
Thank you.
Kind of question, the whole dark skies thing. This is different lane. Not out in the middle of the like, no dark skies or street lights. This is for blinding. I don't understand the town. Dark skies.
The street lights themselves are not dark sky.
I'm sorry, I can't hear
Are
you.
you saying the street lights are not dark sky compliant?
Well, there are no dark skies on Skipper's Lane with the street lights flash. So, is there a way to?
No, I think that the dark
the town
sky,
would be more
the
consistent?
dark sky rules are really hard to enforce because code enforcement officer driving around can't
Yeah. Well, yeah, things that were built prior to the passage of the code in 2010 are more or less grandfathered unless there is a major renovation that equals, I think, 50% of the value of the property or the home. So if you do a big reno, you have to come into compliance. You know, that's a great question. Anne, did you have a comment? Yeah. 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 It's not difficult in concept. the going through those 871 complaints, I could not come up with a way to, I'll say, dump it in Excel and automate it. So yeah, I think it could be done in concept, and I think that's a great idea. And one thing I didn't mention is that, you know, a year and a half or 2 years ago, when we spoke to then town attorney John Burke, he talked about upgrading the system that his office uses to track complaints, and that the new system would allow a lot better collection and interrogation of the data. So if that is still ongoing, there might be a way to do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, no, typically what happens, you know, my day job developing it and coming up by was that direct so
Southold.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. But it seems like a system that would allow, to your point, easy collection of the address and the frequency of complaint and cross-reference it, short-term rental to noise. I think that would be very powerful. And, you know, after 3 or 4 or 5 complaints to the same address, maybe something has to be done. Sir? Jill may want to jump in, but there is a tree committee that is working on developing a code. Two more? Okay, we'll have two more questions. Ma'am? Yes. Ma'am. Uh-huh. Yes. I might get the details wrong, but I think it's, there's certainly I think there's a stop after 5 or 6 o'clock during the week. I think 5 p.m. on Saturdays and none on, this is leaf blowers, by the way. This isn't all equipment, commercial. So there's an exception for the homeowners, but I think it's no leaf blowers on Sunday. And there might be a limit at 5 o'clock on Saturday. Yes, yeah. Hit the button and search for leaf blower. Okay.
Wrap it up. Paul for coming, Margaret for
Pleasure.
All yours.